Weakness isn't what you think it is. It's not about physical strength or how much you can lift or how tough you look. Weakness is a pattern, a set of behaviors, a way of moving through the world that guarantees you stay stuck, stay small, stay powerless. And here's what most people don't realize. The weak all share the same traits, the same habits, the same predictable patterns. You can spot them from a mile away. They complain about the same things, make the same excuses, avoid the same responsibilities, and wonder why their lives never change. And the dangerous part, the part nobody wants to admit, is that these patterns are contagious. Spend enough time around weak people and you'll start adopting their behaviors, their mindset, their excuses. You'll start blaming instead of building, avoiding instead of confronting, wishing instead of working. The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, they all recognized that strength and weakness aren't about circumstances or advantages. They're about character, about how you respond when things don't go your way, about whether you take responsibility or make excuses. And they identified the patterns, the specific traits that separate those who build themselves into something formidable from those who stay weak, stay bitter, stay trapped in a life they hate, but refuse to change. And if you're here, if you're still reading, then part of you recognizes something. Part of you knows you've been slipping, knows you've been exhibiting some of these patterns, knows that weakness has been creeping in, and that recognition, that discomfort, that's actually a sign of strength. Because the truly weak don't question themselves, don't examine their patterns, don't look in the mirror and ask if they're becoming someone they respect. So let me show you what the weak have in common, the specific patterns they all share, not to shame you, not to judge you, but to give you a clear picture of what to avoid, what to eliminate, what to recognize in yourself before it becomes who you are. The first thing the weak have in common is they make excuses instead of progress. Every single time something doesn't work out, every single time they face an obstacle, every single time life doesn't hand them exactly what they want, they have a reason. They have a story. They have someone or something to blame. And those excuses, those justifications, they feel good in the moment. They protect the ego. They shift responsibility. They create a narrative where the weak person is the victim and the world is the villain. But here's what excuses actually do. They keep you exactly where you are, because if the problem is always external, if it's always someone else's fault, if it's always circumstances beyond your control, then you never have to change. You never have to look at yourself, never have to take responsibility, never have to admit that maybe, just maybe, you're the reason things aren't working. I've watched people spend years making excuses. The business didn't work because the economy was bad, because the market wasn't ready, because people didn't understand. The relationship failed because the other person didn't appreciate them, didn't try hard enough, didn't see their value. They're not in shape because they don't have time, because their genetics are bad, because healthy food is expensive. And every excuse, every justification, every externalization of responsibility, it's just another brick in the prison they're building for themselves. Because as long as the problem is out there, the solution has to come from out there too. And out there doesn't care about you. Out there isn't coming to save you. Out there is just going to keep being what it is while you wait for it to change. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." And the weak never realize this. They spend their entire lives focused on outside events, on circumstances, on all the reasons why things aren't working, and they completely miss the one thing they actually control, which is themselves, their response, their effort, but their choices. The strong understand this instinctively. They don't waste energy on excuses because excuses don't build anything. When something doesn't work, they ask, what did I do wrong? What can I control? What can I change? And then they change it. They take the feedback, they adjust, they try again. And they keep doing that until it works. That's not talent, that's not luck, that's just the refusal to make excuses. That's taking responsibility even when it's not your fault. Because taking responsibility gives you power and making excuses takes it away. Epictetus taught his students that some things are up to us and some things are not. And the weak, they focus all their energy on what's not up to them. They focus on how other people treated them, on circumstances, on bad luck, on unfairness. And all that focus, all that mental energy, it goes into things they can't control, which means it produces exactly zero results. Meanwhile, the strong focus on what is up to them, their effort, their attitude, their preparation, their response, and that focus, that energy directed at what they can actually control, it compounds, it builds, it creates results. So here's the pattern to watch for in yourself. When something doesn't work out, what's your first thought? Is it, what did I do wrong? Or is it, why did this happen to me? Because that first thought reveals everything. It reveals whether you're building strength or excusing weakness. The second thing the weak have in common is they avoid discomfort at all costs. Every decision they make, every path they choose, every action they take is designed to minimize discomfort, to stay in the familiar, to avoid anything that feels hard or uncertain or scary. And that avoidance, that prioritization of comfort over growth, it's the death of potential. Because growth only happens at the edge of your capacity. In the moments when you're uncomfortable, when you're uncertain, when you're doing something you're not sure you can do. And if you're always choosing comfort, always taking the easy path, always avoiding the hard thing, then you're actively choosing to stay weak. You're choosing comfort over capability, ease over evolution, safety over strength. Here's what this looks like in practice. You know you need to have a difficult conversation, but you avoid it because it's uncomfortable. You know you need to start the business, make the change, take the risk, but you don't because it's uncertain. You know you need to train, to push yourself, to do the hard work, but you skip it because it's easier to rest, to recover, to take it easy. And each time you make that choice, each time you choose comfort over challenge, you're training yourself. You're building the habit of avoidance. You're programming your nervous system to retreat from difficulty. And that programming, that pattern, it gets stronger every time you repeat it until eventually you can't do hard things anymore because you've trained yourself to only do easy things. Seneca saw this pattern everywhere in Rome. People with every advantage, every resource, every opportunity, and yet they were weak. They were soft. They collapsed under the slightest pressure because they'd spent their entire lives avoiding discomfort. And he wrote, difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body. But the weak never experience that strengthening because they never allow themselves to experience difficulty. They engineer their lives to be as comfortable as possible, to have as little friction as possible, and then they wonder why they have no resilience, no capacity, no ability to handle the inevitable challenges that life brings. I know someone who spent years avoiding discomfort, avoided difficult conversations, avoided challenging work, avoided anything that made them feel uncertain or scared, and they thought they were being smart, thought they were protecting themselves, thought they were living well, but what they were actually doing was atrophying. Their capacity for handling difficulty was shrinking because they never used it, and when real hardship came, when something unavoidable happened that they couldn't escape or avoid, they completely fell apart. They had no capacity to handle it because they'd spent years avoiding the small discomforts that build the capacity to handle big ones. The strong understand that discomfort is not the enemy. Discomfort is the signal that you're growing, that you're at your edge, that you're building capacity. They don't seek it out for its own sake, but they don't run from it either. When something's uncomfortable, when something's hard, when something requires them to stretch beyond what's familiar, they lean into it. They do it anyway. And each time they do, they expand their capacity, build their resilience, prove to themselves that they're capable of more than they thought. That's not superhuman. That's just trained. That's just the daily practice of choosing growth over comfort. So watch for this in yourself. When you're faced with a choice between the comfortable path and the challenging one, which do you take? And if you're always choosing comfort, always taking the easy way, always avoiding what's hard, then you're not maintaining your strength. You're losing it. Because strength that's not tested atrophies, and comfort is the absence of testing. The third thing the weak have in common is they talk more than they do. They have plans, they have ideas, they have visions of what they're going to accomplish, and they'll tell you all about it. They'll talk about the business they're going to start, the body they're going to build, the life they're going to create. But when you check back in 6 months, a year, 5 years later, nothing's changed. Because they were never actually building, they were performing. They were getting the dopamine hit from talking about it, from imagining it, from receiving encouragement and validation, and that hit was enough. It satisfied the need without requiring the work. And this is insidious because it feels like progress, feels like you're doing something, feels like you're working toward the goal. But talking isn't building, planning isn't executing, and intention without action is just a wish. Marcus Aurelius understood this completely. He wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one. Not talk about being one, not plan to be one, not tell everyone you're going to be one. Be one, do the thing, take the action, live the principle." And the weak never make that transition from talking to doing because talking is safe. Talking is comfortable. Talking gets you attention and validation without requiring you to risk failure. But doing, executing, actually building something in the world, that's vulnerable. That's risky. That exposes you to criticism, to failure, to discovering that maybe you're not as capable as you thought. And the weak can't handle that exposure, so they stay in the talking phase forever. I've seen this destroy people's potential more than almost anything else. People who talk about writing a book for 10 years but never write a page. People who talk about starting a business but never talk to a customer. People who talk about getting in shape but never show up to train consistently. And they're always busy, always planning, always preparing, always getting ready to start. But they never actually start because starting means transitioning from the safe world of imagination, where everything's perfect, to the real world, where things are messy and hard and don't work the first time. Epictetus taught his students, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. And that second part, the doing, that's where the weak get stuck. They say what they would be, they talk about it, they imagine it, but they never do what they have to do, because doing requires discipline, requires consistency, requires showing up when you don't feel like it and working when nobody's watching. The strong understand that talking is the booby prize. It's the consolation for people who aren't actually building, so they skip it. They don't announce their goals. They don't share their plans. They don't tell everyone what they're going to do. They just quietly do it, and they let the results speak. Here's the pattern to watch for. When you have an idea, when you have a goal, when you have something you want to accomplish, what's your first instinct? Is it to tell people about it, to share it, to get feedback and validation? Or is it to immediately start taking action toward it? Because if your first move is to talk about it, you're probably never going to do it. You're going to get your validation from the talking and never feel the need to actually execute. But if your first move is action, even small action, even imperfect action, then you're building. You're proving to yourself that you're serious. You're creating momentum that talking never creates. So here's the rule. Don't talk about what you're going to do, just do it. And when it's done, when it's built, when it's real, then you can talk about it if you want. But talk after action, never instead of it. The fourth thing the weak have in common is they need constant validation. They need other people to tell them they're doing well, that they're on the right path, that they matter. And that need, that dependency on external approval, it makes them manipulable, makes them unstable, makes them prisoners to other people's opinions. Because when your sense of worth is tied to what other people think, you're not in control of it anymore. You're at the mercy of their moods, their judgments, their standards, and you'll twist yourself into whatever shape gets approval, even if that shape has nothing to do with who you actually are or what you actually value. I've watched people completely lose themselves chasing validation. They change their opinions to match whoever they're talking to, change their goals to match what people praise, change their entire lives trying to get approval from people who don't even know them. And the tragedy is that it never works, because external validation is like junk food. It feels good in the moment, but it doesn't nourish anything real. You get a compliment, you get a like, you get someone telling you you're great, and it feels good for about 5 minutes. And then you need another hit, and another, and you're on this endless treadmill of seeking approval that never satisfies because it's not addressing the real issue, which is that you don't approve of yourself. Marcus Aurelius dealt with this at the highest level. He was emperor. Everyone wanted something from him. Everyone had an opinion about him. Everyone was judging every decision he made. And he could have spent his entire life trying to please everyone, trying to get everyone's approval, trying to make everyone happy. But he understood that was impossible. He wrote, "I have often wondered how it is that every man loves himself more than all the rest of men, but yet sets less value on his own opinion of himself than on the opinion of others." And that's the trap. You value yourself, you care about your life, but you let other people's opinions of you matter more than your own opinion of yourself. And that's backwards. That's weak. Epictetus taught that the key to freedom is caring only about what's within your control, and other people's opinions are not within your control. You can be the best person in the world, and someone will still criticize you. You can do everything right, and someone will still disapprove. So tying your peace, your worth, your sense of self to their approval is giving them power they don't deserve and creating suffering you don't need. The strong understand this. They build their own internal standard. They know what they value. They know what matters to them. They know what kind of person they want to be. And they measure themselves against that standard, not against other people's opinions. And that internal validation, that self-approval, it's stable. It's not dependent on mood or trend or who's watching. It's based on whether you showed up, whether you did your best, whether you lived according to your principles. And that's something you can control. Here's how to recognize this weakness in yourself. How much of your day is spent thinking about what other people think of you? How many decisions do you make based on how they'll be perceived rather than whether they're right? How much energy goes into managing your image instead of building your character? Because if it's a lot, if you're constantly performing, constantly seeking approval, constantly checking to see how you're being received, then you're weak. You're a prisoner to external validation. And the solution isn't to stop caring what people think entirely. It's to care more about what you think, to build that internal standard, to live according to it, and to let other people's opinions be information you consider, but not the determining factor in how you live. The fifth thing the weak have in common is they compare instead of compete. They're constantly measuring themselves against other people, constantly looking at what others have, what others are doing, what others have accomplished. And that comparison, that focus on what everyone else is doing, it keeps them stuck because they're never focused on their own path, their own progress, their own potential. They're too busy resenting someone else's success or using someone else's failure to feel better about themselves. And neither of those mindsets creates growth. Resentment doesn't make you better, and schadenfreude doesn't build anything. They're both just ways of avoiding the work of actually improving yourself. Here's what comparison does. It puts your focus external. Instead of asking, what can I do today to get better? You're asking, why does that person have more than me? Instead of focusing on your own progress, you're focused on someone else's position. And that external focus, that constant measuring against others, it's exhausting and it's pointless. Because there will always be someone ahead of you, always be someone with more, always be someone doing better. And if your peace depends on being the best, on having the most, on being ahead of everyone, you'll never have peace because the comparison never ends. Seneca warned about this explicitly. He said, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." And the weak are always craving more, always looking at what others have and feeling like they're lacking. They can't celebrate their own progress because they're too busy comparing it to someone else's. They can't enjoy their own success because they're too busy noticing someone else's is bigger. And that mindset, that constant comparison, it's poison. It robs you of satisfaction, of gratitude, of the ability to actually enjoy what you've built because you're always looking at what you don't have. I know someone who destroyed themselves with comparison. Every time they made progress, every time they achieved something, instead of celebrating it, they'd immediately look at someone who'd achieved more. They'd post about a promotion and then spend hours looking at people with better jobs. They'd hit a fitness goal and then obsess over people in better shape. And nothing was ever enough because they weren't measuring against their own progress. They were measuring against an impossible standard of being better than everyone at everything. And that's not ambition, that's insecurity. That's weakness disguised as drive. The strong compete differently. They compete against themselves. They measure today against yesterday, this month against last month, this year against last year. And the only question that matters is, am I better than I was? Am I growing? Am I progressing? And if the answer is yes, then that's success, regardless of what anyone else is doing, because their path is their path and yours is yours. And comparing the two is meaningless. You don't know their starting point, their advantages, their struggles. You don't know the full story. All you know is your story, your path, your progress. And that's the only comparison that matters. Epictetus taught that envy is self-torture, and comparison is just envy with extra steps. You're torturing yourself by focusing on what others have instead of building what you want. And the solution is simple. Stop looking sideways, start looking forward. Focus on your own path, your own progress, your own potential. And if you need a competitive edge, compete against who you were yesterday. Try to be better today than you were then. And if you do that every day, if you focus on that internal competition instead of external comparison, you'll grow faster, you'll be happier, and you'll become stronger because your energy is going into building instead of resenting. The sixth thing the weak have in common is they quit when it gets hard. They start things with enthusiasm, with energy, with big plans and bold declarations. But the moment it gets difficult, the moment they hit resistance, the moment it stops being fun and starts being work, they quit, they pivot, they adjust. They tell themselves maybe this wasn't the right path. Maybe they should try something else. Maybe there's an easier way. And they go looking for that easier way, and they never find it because it doesn't exist. Every worthwhile thing requires you to push through difficulty, to persist through resistance, to keep going when quitting would be easier. And the weak can't do that. They've never built the capacity to suffer through the hard part, to get to the reward on the other side. Here's the pattern. They start the business and it's exciting for the first few months. They're motivated, they're working hard, they're building momentum, but then they hit the plateau. Growth slows, problems emerge, the initial excitement fades, and it becomes a grind. And this is where the weak quit. They tell themselves the market wasn't right, the idea wasn't good, they're not cut out for it. But the truth is simpler. It just got hard. And they don't have the discipline to push through hard. They only have motivation, and motivation is unreliable. It comes and goes based on how you feel, based on whether things are working, based on external feedback. And when it's gone, the weak have nothing left. They have no discipline, no commitment, no ability to keep moving when they don't feel like it. Marcus Aurelius understood that persistence is everything. He wrote, "Our actions may be impeded, but there can be no impeding our intentions or dispositions, because we can accommodate and adapt. The mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." And the strong live this. When they hit an obstacle, when things get hard, when resistance shows up, they don't quit. They adapt. They find another way. They treat the obstacle as information, as feedback, as something to work through, not something to use, as an excuse to give up. I've watched people quit 100 times, always right before it would have worked. They quit the business right before it turned profitable. They quit the training right before they would have broken through the plateau. They quit the relationship right before it would have deepened, because they couldn't handle the hard part, couldn't push through the resistance, couldn't trust that on the other side of difficulty is the result they wanted. And the tragedy is that quitting becomes a pattern. Once you quit one thing, it becomes easier to quit the next thing, and the next. You build the identity of someone who starts things but doesn't finish them, someone who gives up when it gets hard. And that identity, that pattern, it follows you everywhere. You can't succeed at anything meaningful because you've programmed yourself to quit when it stops being easy. Seneca taught that a gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials. And the trials, the difficulty, the hard parts, they're not obstacles to success. They're the mechanism of success. They're how you build the capacity, the skill, the character that creates results. But you only get that if you stay, if you push through, if you refuse to quit when it gets hard. The strong understand this instinctively. When it gets hard, that's not a signal to stop. That's a signal that you're close, that you're at the edge, that the breakthrough is coming if you just keep going. So they do. They keep going, not because they feel like it, not because it's fun, but because they made a commitment and they don't break commitments to themselves. And that refusal to quit, that persistence through difficulty, that's what separates those who build something real from those who just talk about it. The seventh thing the weak have in common is they live in the past. They're constantly rehashing old wounds, old failures, old grievances. They're stuck in what happened, what should have happened, what could have happened if only things had been different. And that backward focus, that inability to let go of the past, it keeps them completely stuck in the present. Because you can't move forward when you're constantly looking backward. You can't build a future when all your energy is invested in relitigating the past. Here's what this looks like. They bring up the same stories over and over. The time they were wronged, the opportunity they missed, the person who hurt them, the mistake they made. And they tell these stories like they're fresh, like they're current, like they're still defining their life. And in a way, they are. Because they've made these past events their identity. They're the person who was betrayed, who was treated unfairly, who didn't get the break they deserved. And that identity, that victim narrative, it gives them something. It gives them an excuse for why they're not further along, why they haven't built more, why they're still stuck. It's not their fault, it's what happened to them. And as long as they hold on to that story, they never have to take responsibility for changing their situation. Marcus Aurelius dealt with constant betrayal, constant disappointment, constant difficulty, and he could have spent his time dwelling on it, resenting it, using it as an excuse for not leading well, but he didn't. He wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." Not because the past didn't matter, but because dwelling on it doesn't change it. It's done. It's over. And the only thing you have power over is now, this moment, this choice. And if you're spending this moment rehashing the past, you're wasting it. Epictetus taught his students that it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And the weak react by holding on to it, by making it their story, by using it as a permanent excuse for why they can't move forward. The strong react differently. They process it, they learn from it, they extract whatever value there is, and then they let it go. They don't carry it. They don't define themselves by it. They treat it as something that happened, not something they are. And that release, that ability to let go of the past, it frees up enormous energy. Energy that was going into resentment, into regret, into rehashing, can now go into building, into growing, into creating something new. I know someone who was defined by a single failure for over a decade. One business that didn't work, one relationship that ended badly, one opportunity they missed. And they told that story to everyone, used it to explain why they hadn't tried again, why they were stuck, why they were bitter. And the story became their identity. They became the person who had this thing happen to them. And every time they told it, they reinforced it. They made it more real. They made it more permanent. Until finally someone asked them, "How long are you going to let something that happened 10 years ago determine who you are today?" And that question broke the spell, because they realized they'd been choosing this, choosing to hold on to it, choosing to let it define them when they could have chosen differently at any point. Seneca wrote, "The whole future lies in uncertainty. Live immediately." And you can't live immediately if you're living in the past. You can't seize today if you're still holding on to yesterday. So here's what the strong do. They acknowledge the past, they learn from it, and then they release it. They don't pretend it didn't happen, don't ignore the pain or the lesson, but they don't carry it forward either. They set it down. They let it be part of their history without letting it determine their future. And that ability to let go, to move forward, to focus on what's possible now instead of what went wrong then, that's strength. That's how you break free from patterns that keep you stuck. Here's what ties all 7 together. The weak blame instead of build, avoid instead of face, talk instead of do, need validation instead of creating it internally, compare instead of compete with themselves, quit when it gets hard, and live in the past instead of the present. And these patterns, these 7 traits, they're not permanent. They're not who you are. They're just what you've been doing. And what you've been doing can change. But only if you recognize the patterns, only if you're honest about which ones you're exhibiting, and only if you make the conscious choice to do something different. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." And the same applies here. Waste no more time identifying with weakness, explaining it, justifying it. Just stop doing it. Stop making excuses and start taking responsibility. Stop avoiding discomfort and start leaning into it. Stop talking about what you're going to do and start doing it. Stop needing validation and start validating yourself through action. Stop comparing yourself to others and start competing with who you were yesterday. Stop quitting when it gets hard and start pushing through. Stop living in the past and start building in the present. Because weakness isn't permanent, it's just a pattern. And patterns can be broken, but they're only broken through action, through daily choices, through the moment-by-moment decision to be someone different than who you've been. The weak stay weak because they keep doing weak things. The strong become strong because they do strong things consistently. And strong things are simple. They're not complicated. They're just uncomfortable. Take responsibility. Face difficulty. Execute instead of just planning. Build internal validation. Focus on your own path. Persist through resistance. Let go of the past. Those aren't secrets. Those aren't hacks. Those are just the behaviors that build strength, and anyone can do them. The question is, will you? Epictetus taught that we should demand the best for ourselves, not tomorrow. Not when we're ready, but now. And demanding the best means refusing to exhibit these weak patterns, refusing to make excuses, refusing to stay comfortable, refusing to quit. It means holding yourself to a standard, even when no one's watching, even when it's hard, even when you don't feel like it. Because that holding, that commitment to being better than your weakest impulses, that's what builds you into someone formidable. Someone who can't be shaken, can't be stopped, can't be broken. And that person, that strong person, they're not born, they're built through the daily rejection of weakness and the daily practice of strength. Seneca said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." And exhibiting these weak patterns, indulging these weak behaviors, that's waste. That's throwing away time, energy, potential on patterns that keep you stuck. So stop wasting it. Stop being weak. Not through some dramatic transformation, not through waiting until you feel ready, but through the simple decision to do one strong thing today. One moment of taking responsibility instead of making an excuse. One moment of facing discomfort instead of avoiding it. One moment of doing instead of just talking. And then tomorrow, do it again. And the day after that. And slowly, day by day, choice by choice, you're not weak anymore. You're building something that can't be broken. And that building, that becoming, that's what actually matters. Stay focused, stay grounded, and remember, weakness is a pattern, not a prison. You can break it any time you choose. The question is, when will you choose? Because every day you delay is another day exhibiting the patterns that keep you stuck. So choose now. Choose strength, and watch how everything changes, not because circumstances improved, but because you did.